Good morning. We have a lot to talk about today. A lot was in the news yesterday if the strait was open or if it was closed. So I want to cut right to it and welcome the senator to give us a briefing on this.
Okay. Well, Morgan, thank you very much. Morgan's with us from Arizona. She's
Yeah.
out there for a wedding. And anyway, we're just really pleased that she's with us today. We're in a situation where the peace negotiations between the United States, Iran, and sometimes Israel, depending on what their mood is at the moment, they're in a very chaotic state. On Friday, there was an announcement at one point that Iran had completely opened the straits, and they made the announcement themselves. And President Trump came on, and he, made all sorts of assertions and so forth that yes, this is the peace agreement is coming into place, and it looked promising. However, since then, Iran, and so we're just talking about within the last 24 hours or so, Iran has said that it has closed the Strait of Hormuz again. And the reason that it gave is that it says it was their understanding that the Straits of Hormuz were going to be open, and that's why they were opening it. And the United States then blockaded the straits so that no Iranian shipping can go through, only other shipping. So not surprising. What do you think?
Well, it's just kind of concerning because we declared the strait is open, but the U.S. said that the blockade will still stay in effect for Iranian vessels. So I don't really understand where the American government thought that the Iranian government would then comply, given that is also a sense of their income as well. You also have this so-called opening of the strait only lasts until next Tuesday, which is the end of the ceasefire agreement. And I believe it was supposedly contingent on Israel neglecting the 10-day ceasefire with Israel and Lebanon, that when you kind of read the agreement, it later on states that Israel is still able to strike when there is a imminent threat that may occur. So they don't have to specify, they can really just continue the strikes on southern Lebanon. So far, we've seen Israel boasting online, uploading these videos of them leveling entire cities, lining explosives of schools, hospitals, and completely leveling them to the ground. And by all accounts, I think after the ceasefire was announced, you had Benjamin Netanyahu lay out a video. It's very important to always note if he's speaking in Hebrew, if he's speaking in English, because that's who his audience is directed to. If he's speaking in Hebrew, it's to the Israeli people. This video was in Hebrew, and it was basically saying that they are not rescinding what they've taken so far from Lebanon. They're not moving the line. They're not receding back to Israel. So I think that all kind of plays into the fact that what Iran saw was a very ill attempt to kind of rein in the Israelis, and plus the addition of us adding that we will be blocking their ships, I would say rightfully kind of made them reject this offer.
Yeah, it's clear that Israel and the United States are not singing off the same sheet of music. It's always good to sort of sit back and recognize that sort of the greatest accomplishment that Netanyahu could make would be to get United States military troops fighting on the ground in Iran, where they're stuck in a quagmire. Casualties are taken, so you have to show that you're winning, and we end up, putting more and more troops, and then we end up occupying Iran for the next 3 generations. and that is where the golden ring is. Then the war, all of the interaction between Israel and its surrounding countries, all of their strength will be sapped by the fact that these other Middle Eastern countries are consumed with all of this combat between the United States, and Israel just sits back and sort of gets the benefits of the Americans slogging it out and getting our legs blown off and getting our people blinded and that kind of thing over a war that has utterly no concern for the United States. And this thing, the Iranians might get a nuclear bomb. Well, they, under the old Ayatollah, who was murdered by the Israelis, from 2003 on, he had issued a religious fatwa, which is somewhat similar to the way that a very powerful edict from the U.S. Supreme Court would control things in this country. The fatwa is the highest religious and legal authority in Iran, and that authority said that it was both immoral and that that Iran would do nothing to produce a bomb. And that held from 2003 onward. There's never been any indication that Iran intended to create a bomb. But at the same time, they've accelerated their enrichment of uranium in response to the just incessant provocations and attacks on them. So at this point, now the guy who was behind the fatwa, now the fatwa survives the death of a leader, but it's a little bit different here, where the death occurred because the leader was murdered. We called him, he's this big tyrant and so forth. The fact is, he was actually a relatively moderate individual, and he was the one who prevented the bomb from being set off. But anyway, that's it is interesting that President Trump, he sort of blew his stack, I think, because he issued an announcement, and this was on Friday, and he said, Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They are prohibited, all in caps, prohibited from doing so by the USA. Enough is enough. And then he goes on to say, Israel has to stop. They can't continue to blow buildings up. I'm not going to allow it. Well, bless him. I'm sure glad he did that. Apparently, this caused just shockwaves in Israel when he said that, because it's sort of an unspoken truth that Israel is the senior partner when it comes to the Middle East. It doesn't matter whether it was Herbert Walker Bush, Bush Jr., Obama, Biden, doesn't matter. Israel issues orders. Here we had Netanyahu coming. How many times did he come to the White House? This wasn't so he could convince the president, thus and so. This was kind of given directions, I think. At least that was my impression. I don't know about you, Morgan.
Yeah, that is. It appears to be so. Optically, I mean, that's what you really should. Every American can take away from it. We don't, of course, we're not a fly on the room. We can't really hear what's going on, but looking at it from the side, that's certainly what it looks like. What's also been happening is a lot of war powers resolution acts. You had one in the Senate that it wasn't. There was not a close call to that one, but there was one just 2 days ago in the House, the 16th, where it was very, very close call. And the only reason that it did not pass was because you had a Democratic side with, it was largely a bipartisan vote, vote with the Republicans on not implementing the War Power Resolution Act. You know, we could remind our viewers what is the War Powers Resolution Act, and I believe it was the Democrat representative from Maine, Jared Golden, who decided to side with the Democrats, stating that given the ceasefire talks, it makes the president look weak if the House is not with him. That's what he has stated by saying his reasoning in voting with against the War Power Resolution Act.
Yeah, the resolution failed by a single vote. Although these things are very tricky because it's not as though you have one side that's for the war and one that's against the war.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats are not against the war. The Democrats are against the Republicans, really. They repeatedly say, well, we should have been consulted.
Mm-hmm.
The president should have built up more public support for the war. All of these things. They don't just say, we're against the war is wrong, we shouldn't have launched an unprovoked attack against a peaceful nation. Pearl Harbor was wrong, Iran is wrong. No, they just, it's like, you should have done it our way. And the fact is that this war motion that exists within the White House and the Pentagon and Washington, this is bipartisan. That both sides want endless wars. Both sides want enormous defense budgets, bloated budgets. And then in the meantime, we've got Israel. They launched this terror bombing in Lebanon, and about the time all these peace talks are going on, they launched this massive attack, and they boast that they killed 350 men, women, and children in Lebanon with a wave of 100 strikes within 10 minutes. Now, Lebanon has a small population. It's 5.9 million. And by comparison, for the 9/11 attacks on the United States to have had a proportionate effect on our population, Al-Qaeda would have had to kill 17,000 Americans instead of 3,000 Americans. The violence, the brutality of the Israeli government far outstripped anything that Al-Qaeda was able to do when it flew the hijacked jets into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. And on a per capita basis, the terror bombing of Lebanon was almost 6 times as deadly as the 9/11 attacks in the United States. So it was a very, very brutal thing. And the level of killing, that was just a single day that killed the 350, but there's been about 2,300 in all who have been killed since March the 2nd. And
just to interject, I believe it's 1.2 million people have been displaced from this as well.
Yeah, and again, out of an entire population of 5.9 million, you've got 1.2. The brutality against Lebanon has been fantastic. Israel has attacked Lebanon. They started it around 1948, and they have just intermittently attacked. And now the strategy that their generals are announcing is that they're going to follow the same script that they did in Gaza, where they go and they
are. I think last show, I don't know if we touched on this, is some of the propaganda that the Israeli government is pushing forth on their social media accounts is directly mirrored to what they were doing in Gaza. Some building they blew up, they went in there and they saw a booklet on Mayim Kampf, and that's the validation they needed to ruined, civilian homes. Or I think I just saw an image yesterday that they went to a school and they found weapons in the school. That's akin to what they did in the hospitals. So they're using the very, very same playbook. This time it's with a lot less scrutiny after what the media's and their complicity in allowing what they were to do in Gaza. There's a lot less narrow focus on why they did it or looking for a response from them, which I find reprehensible on our media for doing so, given the fact that they're extending this terror to an actual sovereign nation, and very boasting about it. And given what they did in Gaza, it never bared any fruit. The hospitals, all of their evidence never really bared any fruit. And I don't know if you remember the very first hospital that was that was attacked one time, that Israel vehemently came out against it. And then here we are today that there's only one operating hospital in Gaza out of over 30, excuse me. And that hospital is barely operating. I do lobbying with Doctors Against Genocide, and hearing some of the people who have been to Gaza, their testimonies, but also just their knowledge as doctors. They bring up the valid points that anyone who needed dialysis, they're dead. Anyone who was diabetic, they're dead. Anyone who had asthma, because Israel's not letting in albuterol, they're dead. So those are the unaccounted costs of this genocide that took place in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean the slaughter in Gaza is a Holocaust that continues as we speak, because the way the Israelis have done this is to destroy everything that supports human life. And of course, they killed enormous numbers of people. We don't know how many. Officially, it was something like 75,000, but there was no means to report. There was no government structure to report numbers and so forth. So it's probably 2-3 times that. But that's just the beginning, because the plan is you destroy all things that support human life, and then human life dies. And that is the plan. That's why Israel very systematically destroyed every means of medical support within Gaza, so that people would simply die. You get sick, you die. And that is the Israeli plan. It is as horrible as things that were done by Nazis, done by the Lenin and Stalin and Mao Zedong. It is a horror that, it's a funny thing. Here we are, we send kids off to go see the Holocaust Museum and to see things that happened, 3/4 and a century ago. And meanwhile, this stuff is happening right now, right in front of our eyes. And
they just had a delegation of IDF soldiers who just went to the Holocaust Museum of Auschwitz, I believe, and they got a special tour.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is very ironic that there's no pieces that are placed together. But you have higher numbers of suicide rates within the IDF reserves. I have seen that. You did touch on a really interesting point on the War Powers Resolution Act, how it's this facade of partisanship, even though there really lacks any partisanship there when it comes to this war in Iran. I think you make a great point. I've been kind of saying from the very beginning, after the first resolution failed, that Ro Khanna or a Thomas Massie or even a Rand Paul needs to kind of come out and just lay on the table actually a declaration of war in Iran and make every representative sign their name to it. If they declare this, if they want this war or they don't want this war, because the War Powers Resolution Act just simply states that the power is vested into the Congress, and that these actions solely taken by the executive branch are unconstitutional. It's not even bringing up the question of whether they agree with this war or not, like you had stated. So I thought that was very interesting. And I think the Democrats do play this game. Or if it was roles reversed and it was a Democratic president, you'd see the same kind of partisanship being played out.
Yeah, just I would invite our listeners, just keep your your ear to the ground when you're reading articles, when you're listening to news reports, and you hear typically the Democrats are saying, "Oh, this is bad," and so forth. Listen to what they say is bad, and listen to see how many of them actually say the war is wrong, the war is immoral, the war is part of an ongoing genocide in the Middle East, or whatever it is, whatever they would say. Listen for that, as opposed to we weren't consulted. These rules weren't followed just right. This is way beyond, which rules and whether this was done precisely this way. This is about killing massive numbers of people, and it's about the United States. And I tell you, I love my Marines. I got the flag right here, and I shed a lot of blood in the Marines. And I am on the side of those guys 100%. And the same thing, I mean, I've tremendous admiration for our 82nd Airborne guys and all the other Army people, but I don't want to see them sent to Iran on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu, who many people consider to be a very serious war criminal. So,
I mentioned, Iran hasn't, committed an attack on U.S. soil. By all accounts, I mean, most Americans couldn't point out Iran, no less the Strait of Hormuz, before this engagement even occurred. So this kind of this fallacy of that it's for the betterment of our national security, the betterment of America, to bring safety to America, doesn't really bear any fruit if you go back a few months and you were to ask people on the street what they thought do we need to go to war with Iran, they wouldn't know what would be this talking point that the mainstream media and our politicians are taking for saying or justifying this war. It wouldn't have been in the forefront of their minds. A lot of what been in the forefront of their minds is just grocery costs or gas costs, which seem to have had a negative impact due to this engagement. So I find that, an interesting point to bring up too, is that Americans are, like myself, kind of scratching our head on the narrative of why this is even necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, sort of the tactics that are used by the Israelis. I think, there seems to be pretty good agreement that Pakistan is doing everything possible to facilitate a peace agreement and trying to be kind of a neutral third party in all of this. Well, there's an article that came out of Reuters recently, and this was just on Friday they issued it. It turns out that Israel has this approach that they will kill all the civil leaders of Pakistan, so that there's nobody to make peace with, and that way the thing will constantly be blocked. And the Pakistanis were sufficiently concerned that after the peace talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, that the Iranian negotiators would be murdered on the way back. It was a concern that the Iranians had, for very good reasons. They've been killed every time they've negotiated. And so Pakistan deployed 24 fighter jets to escort them back, along with airborne warning and control systems, just because the Israelis are so duplicitous about the way that they engage in negotiations that Pakistan felt duty bound or honor bound to provide
Escort them.
military escort to keep the Israelis from killing the negotiators. So it's a strange time where, interestingly, the New York Times had a small but interesting article, and they said that the small speedboats that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is using in the Strait of Hormuz are the main threats that's stymieing shipping. It wasn't clear, there are missiles that are fired, but apparently the principal threat is from these little boats that the Revolutionary Guards have. Now we've touted, oh well, we wiped it. They have no navy, and the fact is that Iran's not a naval power in a classic sense, and so they had some old frigates. We sank 6 or 7 frigates, and we've bombed a lot of little boats, but there's no way that we can eliminate all of the small boats. It's sort of this mosquito fleet that they have, and so that's the manner in which they are stopping the traffic. And it has been confirmed that I think the British Navy said that they had a report of firing on a tanker, and another organization reported that a couple of vessels had tried to get out through the strait, and that they were forced to turn back. So it does seem that the blockade on the Straits of Hormuz is in place. It is not wavering in any respect. And basically where we stand now is that Iran has said, look, the negotiations that we had an agreement with the United States and Israel that the Strait of Hormuz would be open, and that's been violated because now the United States has blockaded the Straits of Hormuz. I tend to support their side of things, because they had announced very publicly that the Strait of Hormuz was open, and they did that at the same time that Trump was saying the same thing. And then the United States announced, okay, we're imposing the blockade. The blockade's going to stay in place until everything is resolved. And at that point, that broke the deal. So we'll see what happens. Maybe some of this is a little bit inevitable until things shake out. There's tremendous pressure on the Iranians because of all of the bombing, all of the killing, all the destruction. At the same time, there's a lot of pressure on the United States and even on Israel because the U.S., the clock is ticking as we approach the November midterm elections, and nothing, all the air is being sucked out of the room in terms of what is the Trump administration doing for Americans in America. It's all about what we're doing for Israel on the other side of the earth with all this massive buildup. There is a somewhat similar situation happening in Israel, because now the prime minister is not up for election. That's not the way that it works in a parliamentary system. But the parliament is up for election in October of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so their politics is very complicated. at this point, I think there's sort of a consensus that they, they've managed to kill a lot of people and they got the upper hand, and Israelis kind of like that. But at the same time, I think Netanyahu would like to be able to declare that he has achieved something lasting. So there are pressures on everyone to resolve this in some fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I would add Netanyahu's position is interesting given the fact that he has corruption charges. So he, on the other side, he actually has a vested interest to keep the chaos going. They just extended the prosecution or delay the prosecution, excuse me, stating security concerns for the state of Israel. So they will not be holding the corruption charge case pertaining to Benjamin Netanyahu, which is convenient for him and makes him stay in power. I've heard that there's this documentary that kind of goes into what's going to be brought forth in the investigation, and it's a long list of corruption that seems to have very sound evidence tied to it, dating or even including his wife is implicated in some of those corruption dealings and bribes and taking gifts from foreign leaders and coercing gifts from foreign leaders in return for policy. So all that's very interesting to add as well, because a character like Benjamin Netanyahu will do whatever it takes to remain in power, so that case is not brought up and that he does not see actual justice when it comes to corruption. I mean, he should see justice for various other things that he's done. And there's record protests within Israel as well from the civilians who are stating that this war that now is extended to Iran is not good for Israel. And there's been footage and photos of leveled buildings from missiles from Iran that the Iron Dome cannot catch, and so their actual livelihoods are also on the lines as well, given this engagement. And I know that we'll find out more when the ceasefire ends this Tuesday. And by all accounts, it does not look like we are, in my opinion, reaching any kind of sound deal that will leave both sides to lay down their arms and stop this conflict. Now, I know that we're kind of wrapping up at the end of the show. I want to get your take on this. It's not that pertinent to war or anything, but it is the head of the Department of War. He holds a prayer sessions at the Pentagon. I don't know if you've seen this, Senator, where he quoted a section of Pulp Fiction, Samuel L. Jackson, stating that it was actually from the Bible. And there's video of it, and video pans over to some of the generals and people within the military, and they're kind of snickering as if they know that this really isn't a Bible verse. I want to kind of get your take on that, and we can pivot away from some of the doom and gloom of this conflict.
Yeah, I very much wish. Yeah, I'm a Republican, okay, and I very much wish that the White House would stop making religious references to this war, and some of it is really repugnant. The idea of praying for bullets to hit their mark and this kind of thing. I don't think that type of prayer has ever been acceptable in Christian tradition, ever. I mean, you go back hundreds of years, and it's just, there is no reference by Jesus in Scripture to calling for war, calling for armed uprising or violence against anyone. Now, Jesus did not encourage some sort of uprising among soldiers. He recognized that this is sort of the way that things are. he gave great praise to a Roman soldier who became a follower of his. So, I think, there was an acknowledgement of acceptance of military need, but the major pronouncement he ever made, and there is none in favor of war ever, minor, major, whatever. The major pronouncement was, on the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be known as the children of God. Mm-hmm. And I think that reflects tradition going back to the very earliest, to the original disciples of Christ. That was the teaching that he left them. The Sermon on the Mount was the new covenant, the way that Christianity would be, and so it is a mistake. It's an ironic thing with the conflict with the Pope that's going on. The conservative Catholics were sort of in a wait and see mode with Pope Leo. They really were watchful, because there are a lot of things, Pope Francis was widely disliked by conservative Catholics. They view him as having been very much in conflict with Christian teachings and tradition. Pope Leo, sort of a wait and see. But ironically, what has happened is that the conservative Catholics tend to be against this war and a number of the other wars. They're not like hippie types, but they're intellectual supporters of peace. They believe that it's beneficial to this country and to others. And ironically, here you had this conflict between President Trump and the Pope. And if President Trump had gone after the Pope on border control, I think the conservative Catholics would have been on his side. But here, when Trump went after the Pope on something that is clearly part of Christian tradition, and what it has done, it has enormously increased Pope Leo's power and influence among Catholics globally. So it has had very much the opposite effect of what President Trump had hoped. And I just think that, the dynamics of religion are not the same as the dynamics of business or politics. And if you don't have a gut feel for the way that the politics of religion works, you're best to just stay out of it and put your efforts elsewhere. But I think with Hegseth, I don't have a problem with him saying, we pray for guidance, or sort of the traditional approach that Christians would do. But when you start to pray that God's going to help your violence and so forth, please draw back from that. That is very counterproductive, and it is in stark conflict with Christian tradition and scriptural teachings.
Yeah, I think it's very distasteful too, and then it also has that element of we're kind of being told that Iran is taking this very radical religion and interjecting it into all facets of its its daily life, including the military. And then you have someone like Pete Hegseth who is doing these prayers, and it's taking this stance, or calling on more members in the service, armed service, to have this warrior ethos. It seems very extreme in my eyes. And then he goes and he quotes, it's not even an actual Bible verse, it was from Pulp Fiction, that kind of speaks to violent action, that God will help him with his violent action. It reads very distasteful, and the case of him not even reading a Bible quote, that he might not be the eligible one to actually stand and give prayer service every Sunday at the Pentagon. So I just thought that'd be something interesting to leave us off with, and kind of tie it to what's happening here domestically. And
well, I would just tell you that I pray often for peace. I pray for our country to be at peace. I pray for our troops not to be slaughtered in a useless war. I pray for the people undergoing the Israeli terror bombing in Lebanon, both for the Christians and for the Muslims, the Shia and the Sunni Muslims. I pray for the people of Iran. Over many years, I've had communications with Iranians, and these are not wild-eyed, crazy people. These are very rational, very civilized people. Americans don't know what life looks like in Iran. It's not. Yeah, we see people, dressed in religious garb and so forth, but we're not shown the pictures of the ordinary people on the streets and driving their cars to and from work and shopping in the grocery stores and things like that. This is not some sort of a strange environment. It's kind of thing that we'd be very familiar with as Americans. And so I pray for all of those people, and I pray for the Israelis that they, will have peace.
Yeah.
But I'm not worried that they need to be relieved from somebody going after them, but I worry about their government. I would pray that their government would have a change of heart and find some love in their hearts for their neighbors.
Yes. Well, thank you, Senator. That's a very beautiful way to end things. So with that, I want to encourage everybody to, like and share this with your friends, and then tune in next week to focus on the news. Hopefully we will have better news.
So maybe.
All right. Goodbye, Senator. Thank you.
Bye.